Welcome, Luminauts, to another episode of Montessori Meetup. My name is Rachel Ossie, and I am your host. This morning, we are discussing a topic that is absolutely critical to our vodcast. We are called Montessori Meetup, but let's actually figure out what Montessori is. Our first guest today is Virginia Brooks. She serves as the executive director of the Montessori Institute of North Texas, which is otherwise known as MINT. Virginia holds a master's in education with a focus on Montessori from Loyola University, and also holds 3 Montessori diplomas spanning from infancy through the elementary years. Virginia has been an elementary guide in AMI Montessori schools in South Carolina, Colorado, Virginia, and Texas. She is also a member of the board of directors of the Montessori Accreditation Council for Teacher Education. So welcome, Virginia.
You. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, Virginia, let's talk a bit about the basics of Montessori as an educational philosophy. So, in order to understand Montessori today, I think we need to have some context about it in about its history. Could you give us a brief history of how the Montessori method began?
Absolutely. Well, Maria Montessori herself was a scientist and a doctor. And so her entire method is based on the science of observation and things that she saw in children. Um, when she first started her work, she observed that children and the things that children were given to do, particularly where she was living in Italy. So the activities that were given to children that may or may not have been in school were not appropriate for them. Sometimes one of the things she notes specifically is that they were given, she noticed them playing with breadcrumbs because they had nothing to play with.
Mm.
Children were sort of a back thought or an afterthought in society during the early 1900s.
Right.
And so one of the things that Montessori did was observe the different things that they were doing developmentally, depending on how old they were and what was given to them, and saw that, oh, hey, they're pushing these breadcrumbs around for a reason. They're taking these wooden pegs out of this one place and putting them in a different place because it's something inside of them that needs to be doing this. They're developing right now.
Mm.
And that's really what her method is based on, is watching these children work with whatever they were given and noticing the things that were natural, the urges that they had, and how they learned to do the things that they needed to learn how to do.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think some people might think of Montessori as something that's novel or a newer way of looking at education, but that's not really the case at all.
No, no, it's an old method, right? Early 1900s, but because it's based on science, because it's based on children's development, which we are always learning new things about development, but never really ignoring what we've discovered in the past already. It's still valid today, which is why I do the work that I do.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so there's a lot of terminology in Montessori classrooms that is different from what you might find in a more sort of standard American classroom. And one of those is the prepared environment. Can you talk to us a little bit about what a prepared environment is and why it's important?
Absolutely. So because of all of the research and observation that Montessori did, she really saw that children needed certain things to really cater to the things that the needs or urges that they had at certain age levels. So you'll see the prepared environment is really the classroom and the teacher. We could also say the prepared adult. And so the prepared adult is a teacher that goes to training and learns the different theory and development and observation principles and practices in Montessori, and then they implement that in the prepared environment. So I would say that the prepared adult is just as important or more important than the prepared environment. Now, the prepared environment is that classroom children walk into and they see things that are for them, right? You see lower shelves so that children have the ability to see everything that's on their shelf. You see things going in chronological order from maybe the earliest lesson that a child might have in the environment to one that's 3 years later because the environment is set up so that we do have a mixed age group. Something that really we work hard on in our prepared environment is to remove obstacles so that children have the ability to be independent in their work. And the goal of this environment is concentration. So this child finds something that they want to do. They've been given a lesson on how to do it appropriately. And then it's so interesting to them and their needs at that time in their life and their development that they sit and they focus and they concentrate on this. And it is fulfilling. It's almost um, like a release of energy. It's wonderful for them. It doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like school. It's something that they needed to do to like a balm almost,
Mhm.
satisfy an urge.
And what is the advantage of teaching very young children to do things by themselves?
My husband and I joke about this all the time. Sometimes we wish our children weren't as independent as they are. Um, Come back to bite us a couple of times. I'm joking, but I think that the advantage is really a child becomes more aware of the things that they are capable of,
Mm,
and that the sooner they'll learn the things that they are good at and who they are as a person by exploring these different things that are in their environment, that prepares them to become a more prepared person in the world, the society, right? They find out who they are. What we say in Montessori is in that first 3 years, that first 6 years, really, they're developing who they are as a person, like their individual self, right?
mhm.
And then we move past that in that 6 to 12 range. And during that 6 to 12 range, they're trying to figure out who they are in society and how they can help. And that's what we want, right? People are trying to figure out how to work with each other. We do it in a work setting all the time. And the earlier that children figure out who they are, what they're good at, how they can help, learn how to concentrate and tackle new challenges every day without being stressed, without being frustrated, um, that will all benefit society later in life, right? And them personally as well.
Absolutely. And this is just anecdotal, but back in a previous life, I used to be a piano teacher. And so I
Yes.
would take a lot of kids, into my home and teach piano lessons. And I would usually give them my contact information and say, okay, if you're working on something this week and you're really struggling, please reach out because even though you have one lesson a week, I'm happy to help you in the interim. And I only had 2 kids ever do that, ever take advantage of that after, years of doing this. And both of those kids were Montessori elementary kids who would just pick up the phone and say, "Actually, I am really having trouble with the fingering on the scale. Like, could you explain it to me?" And then they would just hang up the phone and work on it.
Yes.
But I always found
That
it fascinating.
friendliness with yeah. So that friendliness with error, that ability to go and find information for themselves without having to ask for it um or wait on somebody else, I think you definitely see overwhelmingly in a Montessori child, right? Somebody that's been in a Montessori environment. So,
Right. Well, and let's go into a little more detail about what some of the differences between a more traditional classroom and a Montessori classroom look like.
okay. Well, so I mentioned that age group, right? That mixed age group. So generally we keep our age groups in what Montessori called the planes of development. And so the first plane of development is from birth to 6 years old. And we split that into subplanes usually in a classroom setting. So a 0 to 3 class, usually those are split up depending on your state,
Mhm.
but those are split up in different ways as well. And then you have what most people have seen as the traditional Montessori environment, or what we call the CASA, the 3 to 6 environment. So that's children ages 3 to 6 years old all in one. And then at the older ages, sometimes Montessori schools have a 6 to 12 environment, or a 6 to 9 and a 9 to 12. And then it goes on into adolescence, right?
Mhm.
And so that's a big piece of the Montessori classroom that you don't generally see in a traditional setting. And there are many, many reasons for that. My husband and I always talk about is it really gives children the ability to um, be that different person, be the youngest in a classroom, have older people to look up to, be that middle child that's really focused and working and concentrating throughout their time, and then have that chance to be the oldest as well. Um, Coming to fruition, you see all of this free choice, all of this concentration, all of this development sort of turn into this 5.5, 6 year old that's totally confident, capable, knows who they are, knows who they want, knows what they want to do. And really, can manage the classroom quite a bit and help younger people, show other people what they know. So,
Right.
um, so then the other part of a Montessori environment I kind of alluded to as well is that, smaller furniture, you see small desks, small chairs, a lot of children working on the ground on mats and rugs. You'll see a lot of didactic material that we use. That Montessori developed, it's all scientific, to work with a child in their developmental stage
Mhm.
so that they are learning an abstract concept concretely first and then eventually go back to abstract. So that's what you'll see a lot of. You'll see a lot of like similar colors. Something that we like to do is keep things, in the same color. If say hand washing, right, is a station in Montessori, right, in primary, and so all of the things in the hand washing station will go together. They'll all have flowers on them, or they'll all have apples, or something, so a child knows exactly what they're supposed to have with this material that they're working on. And you'll generally see in a primary classroom the different areas of the classroom. So one is called practical life, and that's care of self and care of the environment, something that we work on. There's a sensorial area, which is really sort of the foundation, the keys of geometry and science and math that the children needs to explore concretely before they can come to an abstract concept.
Mhm.
Then we have language. There's a specific language area, but language is obviously something that we work on all through their time in the environment, and then math as well. You'll see culture, music, art sprinkled all through the environment as well.
And just to clarify for those who are listening, primary is that 3 to 6.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah,
Yep,
so
3 to
sort of
6.
traditional pre-K, kindergarten
Yes,
range?
exactly.
Okay.
Pre-K, kindergarten. Yeah, exactly. So 3, 4, 5, 6
Mhm.
is primary. And then the older ages, that 6 to 12 is elementary.
Right,
So,
right. And so both of my children attended Montessori programs when they were very young. And I had previously not been familiar with Montessori before I had sent them to those programs. And they came home talking about all of the work that they did. I did this work, I did that work. And I thought,
yes.
work? What kind of work does a 2-year-old have? So, can you talk a little bit about thinking about the learning activities that they do as work? What is that terminology? What's the history of that terminology? Do you know?
So, don't quote me on this, but I mean, my thoughts and feelings are that, and knowledge, I guess I would base this on as well, Montessori used the word work to validate what the child is doing. They really are working on constructing themselves, right, in these environments. And so the work that they do in the classroom are activities. They're working with these didactic materials. They're working on how to be with one another, learning how to pass around somebody's work or activity so they're not stepping on it. But that work really is the construction of themselves. And so when we say work in Montessori, it's a validation of the the amount of work, the amount of development, the amount of learning that this child is doing.
That makes a lot of sense. I love the way that you put that. One of the key points about work in the Montessori classroom is that children are free to some extent to choose their own works, right?
Mhm.
So, how do we ensure that children in a Montessori classroom receive a well rounded education when they can choose what they want to do? So, is there a set curriculum that Montessori guides? That's what we call teachers in the Montessori classroom have to follow for all of the children in the classroom, or can they just do whatever they want?
Whatever they want. No. No, yes, there is a set curriculum, but the beauty of the Montessori environment and the Montessori method, I've said this before, is it's based on human development. So these are activities, these are materials these children are not going to want to keep their hands off of. So it is so important that you have a trained Montessori guide, and this is why I do what I do at Mint, because the importance of the adult in the classroom to be able to observe, to be able to recognize that exact moment when this particular material is going to interest this particular child that's in this stage of development is so important that if if the teacher is not trained and doesn't have that ability to see or recognize when it's time for this child to have this next lesson, it might pass them by, and it might never be interesting to that child again. And so, really, it is it's important for a record keeping and observation. A guide needs to be record keeping every day what they've given, and what's next needs to constantly be looking and saying, okay, I see that child is finishing up with this, and they're sort of not interested in that work anymore. And I did notice that they have been walking over to the shelf and looking at this a little more. So it's time for this next lesson. Or I saw this child, they stood next to this other, an older child that was, doing a different lesson, and watched the entire thing quietly and didn't move and was so engaged. And when you see a 4.5-year-old quiet and so engaged and not saying anything,
Mhm.
there's got to be something to that.
Right.
And so it might be time. It might be time for them to, have the beginnings of that particular work. Uh, and so really that observation is key in um, in fulfilling that whole Montessori curriculum. When they move up into the older ages, we make sure we look at the things that are in their particular region. If we're in Texas, we're looking at state standards, we're looking at what the other private schools are doing, and we are making sure that we're observing, we're working through the different things that these children need at the ages that they are. There is something that I do like to say, because we have a 3-year cycle in a Montessori environment, we give children that 3 years to work on the entire curriculum. So it might not be a linear curriculum for a particular child. I have a child who did not do things in a linear fashion, and most children don't.
Right.
Um, but by the end of her 3 years, she was done and she knew the things that she needed to know at that age. So it doesn't look the same for everybody, but but you have to be patient as a teacher, as a parent, and trust that by the end of these 3 years, this end of the 3-year cycle, they will have everything they need.
Right. And that really is an advantage, right? Because you're allowing children who have a natural proclivity, for one area of development, maybe it's math, but they might be struggling more with phonics, but they can feel successful in math and really advance in that while they're working on these other areas, over a longer period of time. So it seems like
Exactly.
there'd be less frustration.
100%. And that again, it's back on the teacher where you say, okay, this child is interested in math. And they're sort of shying away from language. And so that is when we look at language and say, okay, how can we bring the mathematics out of language, right? And you really look at language in a different way and make it into a math problem for them. And so there's give and take there where you as a teacher or a guide, it's all back to observation, right? You're
Right.
watching this child, this child in your environment. So even though it's everybody and everybody has is doing the same thing, eventually you have such an individualized approach with each child.
Right. And you had alluded to state standards before,
Yes.
and that's a pretty good segue, I think, into my next question, which is that the majority, not all, but the majority of Montessori programs that we see, at least here in the US, end before middle school and almost always before high school, which means that children who have spent most of their lives in a Montessori classroom at some point are probably going to have to transition to a more traditional classroom environment. And
Yes.
that's a question that we've heard from parents quite a bit, which is my child going to be able to make that transition successfully. And in your experience, what is the transition process like for kids that come out of Montessori classrooms?
So you're working with your teacher, you're working with your school as a parent. That is something I had to do, is transition my children into a traditional classroom after their time in Montessori. And you start that conversation. Ideally it's at the end of a 3-year cycle, at the end of primary, at the end of either the 6th, the 9th year, or the 12th year, and you are getting ready and having that conversation with your child's guide and saying, okay, we are moving to this traditional school, we're moving to a Catholic school. What are the things that my child is struggling with, or how can we get them to a place where they're ready to transition? Now if they're at the end of those 3-year cycles, there's probably not going to be a whole lot that needs to be done to transition them into a different school. Maybe talking to them about, I think so. It's an interesting side story. I was a Montessori child,
Oh, wow.
and I had to go to a traditional school in the middle of second grade.
Oh,
And it was a public school. I had been in a very tiny private school in South Carolina, and I went to a public school in Wisconsin, and it was so different. And everything was fine except for on the first day of school, I had no idea what the bell meant, and I got in big trouble because I stayed on
no.
the playground longer because I had no idea that you were supposed to come inside when the bell rang. So little random things like that that you need to have those conversations with your children. Now, if you end up having, like I had to choose to move your child in the middle of a 3-year cycle, then
Mhm.
that's when you really start to work with your child's guide and say, okay, at this new school they work on print, and here at Montessori school we work in cursive. So what are some things that you and I can start working on at school and at home together to prepare them so that they are ready for those differences? Really, your child's guide is going to be looking at state standards, is going to be looking at verbiage that they might be using on testing in different places, or in your neighborhood school, to so that those children are using those words, and like understand the lingo of these different things already. So I think it's really a conversation that you're starting with your child's teacher and then continuing to have with them through the time they're there, if you don't have that option to move on to a Montessori middle or high school, which is
Sure.
often.
Right. Maybe more in the future. That's what
Right,
we hope anyway, right?
hopefully.
Yeah. So my last question for you today, Virginia, is um, as parents, I think everyone wants their child to have success in their life, whatever that means for each individual family, right? How do you think Montessori, even in the very early years of a child's life, prepares them for adulthood?
Well, I think really your conversation, or the story that you brought up about your children calling, or your piano students calling you for help, is a great example. Montessori prepares children for life, for real life, not college, not high school. I mean, yes, they'll be just fine. But I think that it prepares them to work in society and in cooperation with other people. And that's something that we all have to do, right? And so a child that is a Montessori child recognizes intrinsically the gifts that they have. um, we talk in elementary, we say, you were given gifts of hands to work with, and brains to think with, and hearts to love with. And I think that that really, um, that is true. These children walk away knowing that the gifts that they have, and recognizing those gifts in other people as well. And so when a child leaves a Montessori environment, they are ready to take on the world. They're ready to find the answers to the questions that they have. Whether or not they know those questions, it doesn't matter, because they know how to get the information, and they know how to um, use that information for the greater good.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Virginia. We really appreciate it. And from Lumen, we want to thank you and everyone at Mint for your partnership over the years. For those of you who'd like to know more about Mint's work, you can go to their website at www.montessori-mint.org. So if you want to check out what they do, some incredible professional development training programs, everything else is on their beautiful website. So please take a look at the website. And thank you again, Virginia. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rachel. This has been a pleasure.
Our next guest today is Anna Termulo. Anna is a Montessori parent coach at Lumin Education and a mother whose 3 children attended Lumin's Montessori toddler and primary programs. Anna is also a certified AMI infant and toddler guide. Currently, she coordinates a parent coaching program called Lumen Beginnings, which introduces parents and caregivers to basic Montessori concepts and presents a variety of ways to implement them at home by creating beautiful learning spaces, predictable routines that foster autonomy and self regulation, and positive parenting strategies that align with a family's dynamics and values. Welcome, Anna.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Anna, just before you came on, we were speaking with Virginia Brooks from Mint about the Montessori philosophy of education and how it works in the classroom. You actually bring that philosophy into the home
That's
and
right. That's
very
right.
young children, younger than the ones that we were talking about with Virginia. Can
Yes.
you briefly walk us through what happens when you first meet a parent in their home?
Okay. So before we do the actual coaching session, we do an initial visit so that I can get to know the families and what is important to them and their values. And from there, I get to have ideas on what need help they need, what support they need, and eventually, they will tell me what actual support that they need. And so I tell them that when you say bring the Montessori in the home, I do not like the home to be a Montessori classroom
Right.
because the home is um, a place for the many members of the family, not just for the children. So it has to be for to make sure that the home functions for all the members of the family. And first, I let the parents know what Montessori is about. This is Montessori is a wholesome approach to learning, right?
Mhm.
And then second, I tell them that I let them know that uh, I do not give them, okay, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to change, this is the routine you need to do. I meet the parents where they are because each parent is in a different stage. And even if I suggest to them something that they need to work on, but they're not ready, it won't work. They need to have, it should come from them because they will be the one implementing this.
That makes a lot of sense. Um, and we've talked a little bit already about Montessori work in the classroom. And like you said, the home is not the classroom. It's an environment for a lot of different ages, a lot of different people. But a core principle of Montessori, I think that you also implement in the home is that freedom of choice and that independence at an
Mhm.
age appropriate level. So
Mhm.
what does freedom of choice or, working on independence look like for a baby or a toddler?
Okay. Well, for infants and toddler, we do not teach them how to choose because they have to know first what they are choosing, right?
Mm,
So in this stage, we present them with good choices. And what is important really at this stage is we provide them consistency and predictability so that when they are safe, when they know what's about to happen, they can choose.
mm,
And we present these choices and they know that they learn the consequences. So we present not too many choices at this stage. We introduce them like just to 2 choices. And then with these simple choices that we present to them, they get to exercise their power to choose.
mm.
And they will know that they learn that, okay, for every action, there is a reaction. For every choice, there is a consequence. So at this stage, the act of choosing is a lesson itself.
Interesting. And I think, well, let me think of an example of this. Let's say, I think a lot of people have toddlers, for instance, who are picky eaters. Um,
Yes.
and how do you make sure that your toddler is able to eat something that's relatively healthy? Can you give us an example of how to incorporate a toddler into a choice? Let's say
That's that's
around food,
that's a good question because many of our families struggle with that, eating.
right?
Well, first of all, we do not even put in our grocery cart things that we do not want our children to eat.
Mm,
So, because if you put that in your cart, they will see it in your refrigerator or in your pantry. And when they see it, they might want it. So, to prevent that, we only have good choices in our homes, right?
mhm.
Of course, as adults, some parents, of course, we want sometimes these unhealthy choices, right? But at this stage, we do not ask the children, what do you want for dinner? We actually offer them two choices. Okay, for dinner, would you like to have baked broccoli or whatever, that
Mhm.
you want them to choose? You present two good choices
Right,
and not an open-ended, what do you want for dinner? I want the chocolate cake that we had yesterday. Nope, that is
right.
not a good choice.
Good
So
choice.
we give them um limits. We give them like two choices. So
Right, right.
and they have the freedom to choose.
Right,
So because we want them to feel that, oh, I made that choice and my voice was heard.
right. And they own that a little bit,
Own
right?
that.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And so
Uh,
we're really teaching them to exercise their power to choose. And, they are learning that, oh, I chose this and this is why I feel good. I chose that. Okay. Maybe next time I won't choose that because it wasn't right. So
right, right. That's a pretty important lesson for a little kid. I mean, that's a
mm,
big deal, right?
yes, yes, yes.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about parent coaching and who needs parent coaching. And I mean, realistically, most parents want to look for resources that are going to help make them a better parent, right?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
is there a specific profile of a person who needs a parent coach? Is this program only for people who are really struggling?
Actually, no. All children are born without any um, handbook, without any instructions, right?
Right, right.
And so we are all learning. And as a parent coach, I bring in tried and tested methods that have worked for 100 years. Montessori method, it's been around for 100 years, and now it is backed up by science. So, and I present these methods to the families, and we make it personalized according to their needs. And so when somebody approaches me, do I really need to a parent coach? Yes, yes, because you want the first 3 years is very important because this everything that the brain is forming um, in a very fast pace
Mm,
during the first 3 years. 80% of the brain is formed by 90% before they enter kindergarten. And so I want families to take advantage of this very powerful and limited stage. So Blooming Beginnings is here if you want some tips, if you want to have a life that is, of course, life is not perfect, but that is easier and will give your children the best start.
right, right. And if you're having trouble getting your toddler out of the house in the morning, like most people, or
Yes, yes,
you want someone to put their shoes away or learn how to hang up their things, and just the little things, right? Too that can
yes.
be a huge, huge help for people.
Correct. Yeah, I've worked with families and they were like, wow, why didn't I think of that? I said, that's what we're here for.
Right.
And because you have, as parents, okay, the teachers in the classroom, all they do is that they teach, right? As parents, we have other things that we're doing. And so you just maybe need this support. We have Lumen Bite Size, which is like 1 hour sessions that you can just ask your questions. And some people really benefit a lot already from that one session with us. But we also have different programs that they can choose from in our website. So But my goal is really to empower parents so that they can enjoy, parenting. And, when we say like start young, involve parents in Lumen education, truly, when we get it right, the first 3 years, the teenage years will be easier because you have already established in the first years, you know, how we want things in the house. Children have already learned what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And so it's very helpful to have a parent coach.
And Anna, you are really good at it. So we feel
Oh,
very
thank
lucky to
you.
have you
Thank you so
on the
much.
podcast today. Well, I
Thank you,
want to thank
Rachel.
you, Anna, for being here today. You do so much incredible work. If you would like to learn more about Lumen Beginnings or schedule some time to talk with Anna about Montessori parent coaching, you can go to the Lumen Beginnings website. That's at www.lumeneducation.org/Lumen Beginnings. And Anna would love to speak with you about what your individual needs are, whether it is figuring out how to get that toddler out the door in the morning, or whether you're concerned about how to introduce a new baby into your home or anything else under the sun. So thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time.